This is Support is Sexy, episode 126, with Dawn Shedrick, founder of JenTex Training and Consulting. Welcome to the Support is Sexy podcast. I'm your host, Elayne Fluker, entrepreneur, author, producer, and founder of Chic Rebellion Media. 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, I talk to women entrepreneurs who share their journeys and the true stories of their wins and their lessons, and give you insight and inspiration to take your business and your life to the next level. Here we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Support is Sexy. I'm excited to have you here. It just would not be the same without you. So today I am thrilled to have our guest, Ms. Dawn Shedrick. Dawn is a very good friend, and she is the founder of JenTex Training and Consulting, which is a company that offers services and support services to social workers and health service providers. What I will say, though, about Dawn, for me, she has been a very important part of the reason that I know that support is sexy. She was a leader in the training that I often talk about called Momentum, and really pushed me in her special, wonderful, sassy, adorable way to ask for support more often than I was comfortable at that time. And it really changed me as a person. So I am forever grateful. Dawn, you know I love you. But in this episode, you'll get so much great insight from Dawn about asking for support and accepting support, about building a business, a consulting business that supports people like social workers or those who provide care for other people. And she really talks about how important it is for caretakers to take care of themselves, which is something a lot of people in that industry forget. On this episode, you'll also learn how to take the path less traveled, even when you're down another road, the importance of figuring out ways to transition from your full-time job into entrepreneurship, reasons to consider the possibility of partnerships, why you should start with the low-hanging fruit when spreading the word about your business, how to get through those moments when business brings you to your knees, the importance of being transparent about our experiences as entrepreneurs. You know, I'm all for that. Support is sexy. How to be vulnerable and ask for support and accept support even when it's uncomfortable. How to trust that support will show up for you. How to be okay with exposing your messiness. You know, we all got some mess. How to battle burnout, which is something Dawn talks about, was sort of the impetus for her launching her business, a conversation about burnout. Also, how to be empowered to say no and be prepared to face whatever comes after that no, and why it's important for us to feel the feels and not numb the pain. So great information in this episode, information and inspiration. I know you're going to enjoy it. For more details and to get links to all of the resources that Dawn mentions in this episode, go to supportissexypodcast.com and search Dawn, D-A-W-N, supportissexypodcast.com, search Dawn, and you'll see all the information and resources right there for you. All right, so I know you're going to enjoy this. Thank you so much for being here as always. And now, without further ado, Dawn Shedrick. So Dawn, thank you so much for joining us for an episode of Support is Sexy. I'm excited to have you here.
Thank you very much. I am absolutely thrilled to be here with you.
Yay! So that everybody knows I really love Dawn. So we're going to start from that place, okay? So Dawn, first question. When did you first fall in love with entrepreneurship?
Wow. Yeah, I've been marinating on this question for a while to really try to go back. I got my first taste and love for entrepreneurship when I was in middle school. My grandmother, my father's mother, opened up a boutique with two of her very best friends. Mm-hmm. And it just always seemed so fun for her. I think because she also had business partners that, made it a little smoother, and they all really did love each other. They were authentically the Three Stooges, if you will. And they enjoyed it. She enjoyed going out and shopping, for the inventory. And again, seeing a healthy relationship that was the foundation for a business really, stood out for me even at, such a young age.
Where did you grow up, Dawn? Did you grow up in New York?
Yeah, I'm a Long Island girl.
Long Island. Yay, that's right. I did know that. Now,
yeah.
What was a young Dawn like as a little girl?
Wow. what was the young Dawn like? I've always been a social butterfly. I've always loved people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was always, even at a young age, just more than just being a social butterfly. Like I've always been drawn to people. So I was the one that was friends with everybody. My family was very, very tight. So that was awesome. I also grew up in a dance school called the Venettes Cultural Workshop on Long Island, which was more of almost a community center for particularly children of color, although it wasn't just Black children, but it was predominantly children of color, where we grew up in dance, also in modeling, and you could take voice lessons, and we, studied all aspects of dance, all different types of dance, but it was more than that. It was family and it was community, and I grew up listening to Nina Simone, and I knew Maya Angelou before she really, was mainstream, if you will. And so my childhood, was awesome. I still am very close friends with a lot of my childhood friends, and I think that was really what formed the foundation for my desire to pursue a career in social work.
What's the name of the workshop? It's called Venettes?
The Venettes, VEN as in Nancy, ETTES, Cultural Workshop. And they're still going, almost 50 years strong.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah, Wyandanch, Long Island. You can look up the VenettesCulturalWorkshop.org online. And they're still going strong. And many of us who grew up in the workshop, I mean, I don't have any human children. I have canine children. But many of my peers, now their children are growing up, through the workshop. And when we have very, very high school graduation rates. Many of the alum of the workshop are literally everything from, one of my best friends from the workshop played Lisa Hudson on Being Mary Jane. They were doctors, attorneys, entrepreneurs, dancers all over the world.
I love that. Now, who would you say were some of your greatest influences? I know you mentioned Nina Simone and Maya Angelou, but who were some of your others growing up?
Absolutely. Well, since we're talking about the workshop, the founder of the Venettes, who was my godmother, Mary Baird, unfortunately, she left this life in 1992, but because her spirit is still with us, she was the founder of the workshop, and she wanted to and did create a space for little Black children to know that they mattered, and to learn their history and to be involved in the arts, many of whom might have fallen through the proverbial cracks in society. And so she absolutely is still with me and is, was an influence. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say the women in my family, very, very blessed that the women in my family have always, been my greatest supports and my greatest inspirations. My family was very much involved with the workshop, but even outside of that, my mom was just the quintessential mother, especially Black mother, like loved her children and, created the space for us to just grow. And, every 5 minutes when I wanted to change, hobbies or get involved with something else, she made it happen and was there as a support and never, always encouraged us to just think critically and, be in and of the world. And she lived it as well. And that goes for many of the other women in my family. I was raised by the village, and I'm certainly grateful for that.
And you mentioned that going through the workshop, and I'm sure all of the women in your life were big influences in the entrepreneurs, or the kind of work, rather, that you evolved into today. Can you tell us how you think those influences and who you were as a young person played a role? Absolutely.
Well, interestingly enough, when I first went to college, I had a few majors.
Where did you go?
I went to Quinnipiac University in Connecticut for undergrad, and I was very good in math, exceptionally good in math. I almost got a perfect math score on my SATs when I was in high school.
Smart.
And felt at the time, and I still love it, although it's not my vocation. But I went to college and was like, okay, I was going to pursue a career as an accountant, because that's one of the things that you did, when you were good at crunching numbers, or at least so I thought. And that bombed. Well, not that I bombed academically. I just realized that that's not what I wanted to do. And so what I realized, I literally had a breakdown to have a breakthrough in my junior year, where I called my mom and was like, I don't want to work in financial services. And she says this literally verbatim. She said, this is your opportunity to literally figure out what you want to do and do it. And it's totally up to you. And what I realized at that time was that I loved being involved on campus, primarily in volunteer capacities. Along with two of my friends, we established an extracurricular group on campus that all we did was gather folks together and perform community service in the surrounding areas, and I loved it. And that was when I realized I wanted to be a social worker. So that's, I was 3 days away from doing an internship on Wall Street, and I said thank you, but no thank you. And I hopped into an internship where I was running a kids summer camp, which was amazing, and I loved it. And I knew then that I wanted to make a career of being in support of other people and creating change.
Now, because you were just 3 days out from an internship on Wall Street that I'm sure a lot of kids would have wanted at that time,
right,
especially someone like you who was so into math and those kinds of things, did you ever have a moment that you can remember where you were like, maybe I should just go ahead and do this? And I ask because I feel like sometimes so many of us are thrown by when the inspiration comes to do something else or something different. So we just go along the road because we're already down that path.
Absolutely. I can tell you the moment that I hung up the phone after calling my recruiter, I said, did I just do that?
Right.
Like all of these perks are laid out on the table. If you're successful at your internship, you can come work for us as soon as you graduate, and you'll start off making all of this money and la, 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 la. And so literally the moment I hung up, because they kept asking me, are you sure? Like, we want to make sure, because once you make it official, there's a waiting list to get your spot.
Right.
And so the minute I clicked the phone, I was like, okay, is this what I want to do? But I can tell you that on my first day at that internship, I knew I made the right decision. Just the people I worked with, the children that were in the program who were just so amazing and beautiful and vibrant and creative. And I just knew, like, from day one, even though, I had a big task ahead of me administering the program, but I knew that I was in the right place. And I have not had any regrets since. I can be completely honest about that.
I love that. So from that point, then, did you go back and change your major, or did you change it before you went into the internship?
No, what I did was, because I did not want to do more than 4 years of undergrad, and a change of majors from, at the time, it was finance to social services would have, had me
like
on an
extended
plan. Right. So I picked it up as a minor because I had taken, I'd already taken sociology and social services courses as electives. So I was able to finish with that as a minor and just immediately started working in human services. And when I went back to get my master's in social work, many people enter social work, from other professions or careers. So it's not an absolute requirement that you have, a social services related degree in order to get into graduate school, for social work. So that worked in my favor as well.
And then after graduate school, what was the first step for you in taking the next move into a career in social work?
Yeah, well, I can say that even before, I took 2 years off of graduation from undergrad before I went back to graduate school. And literally the day after I graduated undergrad, I graduated on a Sunday, and Monday morning I reported to work. And I was working with people with HIV/AIDS, and actually I was working in various capacities. I was overseeing a prevention education program. I was also providing case management services, and was also administering a program that provided financial support, emergency financial support for, basic, needs like rent and utilities to people living with HIV/AIDS. So I jumped right into that, which was amazing. And I'm grateful for that time because it really laid the groundwork and enabled me to get what I call the dirt under my nails in the human services field, because there also was, even though I was providing direct services, there also was a lot of community organizing and advocacy, because this was right before all the medications and the protease inhibitors came out and at least changed the course of health and healthcare for people with HIV/AIDS. But there still was a lot of discrimination and stigma, and people unfortunately were passing away at alarming rates. So I say that, it stinks that that type of work was necessary, but I'm grateful that I was a part of it, at that time, because what I've learned and the skills and just the energy like still carries with me in my career to this day.
And then for how long did you work well, I guess it's not considered a corporate environment, but in the field as an employee before you decided to make the transition to start your own business?
Yeah, I would say, well, early on in my career, when I first finished, when I first got my master's degree, I knew that I wanted to do something on my own.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that back then I saw myself as an entrepreneur, especially as a social worker, because at that time, most social workers that would go, into business for themselves would open up a private practice. Mm-hmm. And at that time, even though I was dipping and dabbing in clinical work at that time, I did not see myself having a private practice, although 10 years later I did. But at the time, so I said, well, maybe I'll establish a nonprofit, because I was working in nonprofits. I knew people who were establishing, especially grassroots nonprofits. And so, I even remember a couple of times discussing with my cousin, who's like a sister to me, we had, thrown around some ideas about establishing a nonprofit for women of color and young girls of color, but those never came to fruition. But I still always had this drive to establish something that would allow me to work on my own terms, to be creative in human services, but also to make sure that I'm meeting the needs of the people without all the bureaucracy and the politics that can come with, the nonprofit world and the human services. But it wasn't until 2008 when a very good friend of mine was also a social worker. She was in a solo private practice, and we had been kicking around ideas and dreams for a while. And she said, look, like, now is the time. Like, why don't we just make this happen? We had an idea for a wellness-based private practice where there was psychotherapy, but also other services, other holistic services. And we started, mapping that out in 2008 and made it happen in 2009. So that was my first full-time jump into the world of entrepreneurship in 2009.
And what was that experience like once you made that jump?
Well, I made somewhat of a transition, which to this day I'm grateful for. So the place where I was working at the time was generous enough to allow me to transition out. So, I bumped down to 4 days, and then I think I went from 4 days to 2 days working at that organization until September of 2009 is when I went full-time into private practice. So the blessing is that by that time, I already had a full caseload and was also doing consulting work and training, professional development training on the side. So, by September 2009, I was, ready to go and gratefully, had a full workload.
Now, was that because with your company giving you the opportunity to sort of scale down so you can go into this other thing, was that because you had the conversation with them and told them what you wanted to do and they were supportive of it? Because I asked because so many of the entrepreneurs I talk to advise our listeners not to just quit your job, think of a way of how you can do it, and it can look a lot of different ways, but no one has mentioned what you just did about sort of scaling down. Well, a couple of people have, I should say, in other ways, but was that because you were brave enough to have that conversation?
Yes, actually, yeah, that hits the nail on the head. I was blessed in that at that time, I had a supervisor who was amazing, who was in essence a friend, but still professionally, enough, to be my supervisor, and a great one at that. And so I had a conversation with her and, explained to her, what my plans were. I knew that the organization had worked with other people before who were transitioning out for different reasons. I don't know if it was always just for entrepreneurship, but I knew that there was an option, to work part-time. And so, I had a very transparent conversation with my supervisor. And, she told me, I remember her telling me at the time, she's like, you seem really, focused and, really committed to making this happen. And I'm just glad that, we can offer you the ability to transition out. So the transition itself took about a year, so it wasn't anything that was quick. And I also wanted to be able to transition out in a responsible and ethical way with the clients I was working with at the time,
Right.
instead of just giving 2 weeks notice and saying adios. So I'm grateful that that's how that worked out.
And then how did the partnership go with the wellness practice that you set up? And how did that business evolve over time? Because then you did move on to the business we're going to talk about next.
Yes.
JenTex.
Yeah.
What was that experience like?
Yeah, it's been a series of transitions. And so the partnership was great. It was a blessing to enter the world of entrepreneurship with a partner. There's less, overhead, per person, so the expenses, for us, each of us individually were not as much. But she and I were friends for many years before we went into business. And I know I've heard horror stories about how going into business with friends, has turned sour. But in our case, it didn't. We were and always were very authentic and upfront with each other. And each of us was aware of what our shortcomings were. And so she was the bookkeeper because I didn't want to be,
Right.
hence, my history of not wanting to go into financial services. But she was the bookkeeper. I handled a lot of the public relations and the social media. We complemented each other, very well in the business, and both, shared of, our commitment to providing holistic services. And we both understood that for mental health, especially for mental health healing, that there's not always just one approach that's going to work. So we both knew that our clients could thrive by coming to a one-stop shop, if you will, and getting psychotherapy and getting massage when necessary. When we had an acupuncturist, we had a therapist who was also a hypnotherapist and a hypnotist. At one point we had somebody who did feng shui, So it was a multidisciplinary practice. It was very successful. And when our lease was up, because the space that we rented, we had a 5-year lease, and as we were entering the last year of our lease, we were visioning for the future. And I knew at that point that I wanted to move into more training and consulting. And she, is an amazing therapist and wanted to remain in clinical practice. So we split amicably, and she still, has a thriving practice. And I have now moved into continuing education and consulting with nonprofits.
I love that. That, like you said, we hear so many horror stories about partnerships, and nothing is perfect, right? We all know that.
No.
Any partnership outside of business or anywhere. But
Right.
yeah, but this idea too of you just going into it together and then getting to the point where you reevaluate everything after a certain amount of time and then decide how you can move forward, whether that's together or in another direction.
Right.
The spark for your business, JenTex Training and Consulting, came during a conversation over a burnt sandwich and burnout, right?
Right.
Tell us about that story.
Yeah. So at the time I was still in private practice, and, my business partner and I, were having our conversations and visioning for the future. During that time, caught up with an old friend who also is a social worker. She's an amazing social worker, has done a lot of, work for women across New York State and beyond, but primarily New York State. And so we caught up and we were having lunch, and this, she's the epitome of a social worker to me. And I always considered her one of my idols in the profession. And we're having this conversation, and she's telling me, I ordered a grilled cheese sandwich, and we're waiting for our food to come. And at the very same time that our server delivers a charcoal like grilled cheese
well-done sandwich.
I like them well done, but I like them to still be edible. So literally, as if we're in a movie, at the same time that this charcoal hockey puck sandwich is being handed to me, she tells me, I'm actually considering switching careers, which, coming from her, was as much of a bomb drop as this sandwich being delivered to me. And so, she says, I'm burnt. I'm tired. I'm tired of dealing with, the politics, the low pay, just the burnout. I still love people. I still want to be a part of change. I still want to be engaged in social justice, but I'm tired. And that really rocked me. And so, as I said, at the same time, I'm having these conversations about what am I going to do? What's next? Going through my own spiritual, work of really, being committed to living my purpose and figuring out what that's going to look like at that point. And I also, at the same time, now all of this is happening within the same week. And I believe that when the universe gives you messages, sometimes the universe goes out of its way to help you see the message. So at this same week, I had gotten a tip off the record that social workers in New York State within the next year or so were going to be required to complete continuing education. We were the last to the party in the entire nation. Everybody else, social workers in most other states have been required to do continuing education. So when I found that out, I said, okay, the universe has given me a nudge that I had the idea, but I was a little fearful, which I'm willing to admit. I was fearful at the time that it actually might manifest. Like, who's going to come to my workshops? Who's going to hire me?
Right.
And so when I found out that folks were going to be required to do continuing education, that's when that's when JenTex was born, or at least the idea of, establishing a full-time consulting and training firm, came to mind, and I made the commitment at that time.
Wow. Now, what was the first step for you in setting up that business?
Well, so I did the legal stuff first, as far as setting up an LLC and getting, setting up the legal business first, because I wanted to do that while I was transitioning out of the private practice business. So I did the legal stuff. I've been a trainer for 20 years. I've been creating, designing, and delivering workshops and trainings, since my HIV/AIDS services days. So I knew how to do that part. For me, it was just about, really creating a business that's going to reflect my vision, that was going to reflect my principles, and that really was going to translate to my desire to be of support of my colleagues, so that when they're at their best, that's going to translate to the clients that they serve. So my initial work was really working on the branding and, creating a business that, really reflected, my goals and my vision. And so that was like really how things started.
What would you say was your next step, I guess, when you looked at, as you mentioned, now that you have this revelation that New York social workers are going to have to take continuing education courses, so you know that the client, so to speak, is out there. But what was your first method of outreach to those people who needed those courses to let them know that your company, your firm existed? Right.
So actually what I started to do was I started to reach out, to and get the word out to the people that I knew first. I've been in human services, first. Right. Started with my circle and my circles. I've been, in the field for 20 years, and at that time, a little less than 20 years, and just started to let people know that this is what I was going to do. And gratefully, everybody was more than receptive, because they, especially once it was made known to everyone, they knew that they were going to have to get CE credits, and nobody really knew at the time how they were going to do it. They didn't know, who was authorized to do it. So, getting the word out in that way, just letting my peoples know before I did anything official, was huge, because they also were spreading the word, and I'm grateful that that's really how, JenTex really got its foundation, was, through word of mouth and just support of people who knew me and who, know my work ethic, and who had even, been to or participated in some of my workshops and trainings before it was a requirement. So that's how I actually was getting a lot of inquiries from people before my first official continuing education workshop went live.
But this was after you told people what you were doing, and then people
Yes.
started asking. That's great. Thank you for sharing that, because I think that's
Yeah.
another thing too for a lot of us starting our own, whatever kind of business it is, but especially if you're working with other clients or partners, not just customers that you don't know who might go on your website and buy your product. Really going out to your circle and saying, this is what I'm doing. Let people know. This is how you can get involved. Yeah, that's excellent.
Yeah, I think you start with the low-hanging fruit because they're people who know you and so you've already built those relationships, whatever the nature of those are. You've built those relationships. I know in my experience and speaking with other entrepreneurs, especially service-based entrepreneurs, is that we don't always realize that our tribe, our target people are usually a lot closer than what we think. And that definitely was the case for me.
Now, talk to us a little bit about this idea of taking inspired action. I know you told us what actually happened sort of in the physical realm, or how it all played out for you, and this idea of taking inspired action, of getting these signals and different things like that. But I know you well from our momentum days, so I know there might be. I'm projecting this. I'm hoping there is. I'm looking for inspiration. But just this idea, though, of being brave enough to take inspired action when you don't know exactly how something is going to work out or how you're going to make it happen. Especially in your case, for example, you had this successful practice with your partner. Now you're moving on. You're getting these ideas, but you didn't necessarily just become fearful and go back into, working for another company. You stepped out on your own.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's been an interesting journey, and it's been an interesting journey. So I have, at the time, in the first few months of JenTex going live, I invested most of my personal savings. At one point within the first year, I had to dip into, some of my retirement savings, and, for marketing purposes and to further develop my brand. And, so even though I cringed every time I had to dip into a bank account or use a card, I also made a commitment to be faithful in the process. I, was very well aware that, even from being in private practice, which overall was successful, but of course we still had our challenges. So I had that experience to know that, there were going to be times that were trying. There probably were going to be times where I would, think that maybe it was easier to go back and get a job. And although I didn't necessarily, but there were, times that, the workshops weren't filling up at first, or at least were not filling up the way that I wanted them to, or had hoped that they would. So the savings, balance was getting lower. And then I just, that's where, well, the name of this podcast is Support is Sexy. That's where the biggest lesson for me was to reach out for support, to make things happen. Because this was a dream that I've had, even when I didn't know what it would actually look like. But I just knew that creating JenTex and what I wanted to do through it was something that I had wanted for many, many years. And so I had gotten to this point, and with all the experience and the people and, the education and everything that I had, that God would not have led me to this, to just leave me there. And so I certainly have had, those moments on my knees in prayer, those moments on the phone with my BFF in tears, times where I've had to shift. My business model has shifted considerably, even since since JenTex was birthed in 2013. But I have to say, spiritually, this has been the biggest or the most significant part of my spiritual journey, being in business.
Someone else first of all, thank you so much for sharing that. I appreciate that. That's what it's all about here. I really appreciate that, for you sharing so honestly. And it's interesting that someone else I spoke to, I believe it was Jen Groover, another entrepreneur, mentioned that entrepreneurship is one of the biggest personal growth journeys people can go through, because it really, I'm paraphrasing her, but shows you what you're made of, and you have to grow and develop in order to continue doing what you're doing. So to your point, it can be very transformative, and it can be, I mean, I'll speak for myself, it can be frightening sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
It can lead to a lot of doubt sometimes. It could do a lot of things to you. But then there's the part of it, like you said, there's the dream or the idea, or knowing that this is what you're supposed to do in some way.
Absolutely. I've invested in business coaches, which overall has made, the world of a difference for me and in my business. And, I'm not working with a business coach right now, but I follow, some that are out there, especially in social media world. And what I have seen is that a lot of, even beyond the business coaches, a lot of folks don't share those moments when you're in tears. A lot of folks are not sharing, and for the most part, I get it. People want to inspire you to follow your dream and to grow this business, and want to share some of the some of what's possible when you do enter the world of entrepreneurship. But I think we collectively do a disservice, and it's one of the reasons why I so appreciate this podcast, is that I know at first when I started to have those moments of, okay, my mortgage is due, and this person was supposed to pay me 2 weeks ago, and I don't want my mortgage to be late. Now at a time when people, especially women, weren't necessarily coming together or sharing in that way, you feel isolated and you feel alone. And I feel like, okay, what is it that I'm not doing? But then, with podcasts like this and more conversations that are out there, more authentic conversations and representations of entrepreneurship, it's like, okay, I'm not the only one. Now, that's not necessarily going to pay my mortgage, but at least that validation does not make me feel like I'm alone. And it gives me permission to be open and authentic about it, And it removes that's the real, it's the reality of entrepreneurship. And for me, it actually has helped reground me. Because I'm not the only one. I'm not doing anything wrong.
You're not by yourself.
And if I am doing something wrong, at least I'm less judgmental of myself, and I can figure out, a better way or another way of approaching something.
And I think that's the big part of it too, is just what you said. It's it removes the shame when you know that other people are going through it or have gone through it, and we're not as focused on the shame. It gives us, like you said, permission to focus on the solution as opposed to the shame. It's like, okay, I'm not the only one. It might not pay the mortgage, but it's like, okay, I don't have to worry about what I'm doing wrong. Everyone else has been through this in some way or another. Let me figure this out.
Right.
Excellent. Now, what would you say as far as support, since that's what we're all about, what would you say has been your lesson? I learned so much from you. I will tell you already know, but everyone, Dawn has been just the master for me in learning how to ask for and accept support. So what would you say, Dawn, to everyone listening about your own experience and what people should consider when, as women and women entrepreneurs, asking for and accepting support?
Absolutely. And thank you. I adore you.
I adore you.
And you've been absolutely a part of my support network as well.
Yeah.
It's, again, the universe, I believe said, you know what, Dawn, in 2016, I'm going to show you what it really means to seek support. Before this year in particular, I would ask for help, in certain, with certain things, and where it was safe to ask for help. Where asking for help wouldn't necessarily make me look like I really needed help.
It's more like a favor.
Right. And it's interesting because, like many people at the beginning of every year, I try to, when I'm developing my intentions for the year, and I'm like, okay, like, what is my theme? Not necessarily a word, but like, what is my theme for this year? And for this year, my theme was integrity. And so the universe gave me many opportunities to be integrity with what it means to actually seek support. So not only did I need, like, let me give you an example. Okay. I've worked with a few virtual assistants over the years, primarily women who have their own business, providing administrative, support to entrepreneurs, especially, online entrepreneurs. My first two virtual assistants, the first one that I worked with, things seemed to be going well at first. Once I felt really comfortable, gave her access to some of my passwords and my social media accounts and, some of my email accounts. And fast forward a few months later, I discovered not only were certain things that I was paying her to do not getting done, but that someone had hacked into her, I guess, email account and then hacked into some of my social media accounts, which were like totally turned upside down. And this was at a point where I was really getting good traction and good engagement on social media. So there were some things that were posted that were not, did not come from me on my business and my brand. And some of my, existing clients and customers made me aware of it. And since I'm not, there also were some other tech issues that were attached to that situation. And so I had to get the tech support and I had to invest, the money into getting the support to get that whole situation handled. But there was also a humbling of sorts that came with that, because I actually had to start with a brand new email platform and lost many of my emails, my business related emails before that. So there were documents that I either didn't save or that I had put neatly in folders in my email program, but that did not, that I didn't save to my computer. So I lost a lot of my business communications through that. So that was a whole mess that had to be cleaned up. But then I said, okay, I can never trust anybody else, especially someone who's not physically in an office with me to help me with my business. So what did I do? I picked up and, started to do a lot of the things on my own, all of my administrative tasks. But then what happened? Business is picking up and I'm getting more requests to do workshops and develop trainings, but I also have to do paperwork and,
you're stuck
administrative
in the weeds.
work, and I'm burnt to a crisp.
Right.
And so it was like this avalanche, if you will. And so fast forward to somewhat of the end point of that particular situation, where I was so exhausted and had a meltdown on the phone with my best friend because, I'm like, I can't do all of this. Business looks good on the outside to most, but people don't know what's going on the back end. And she's like, that's because you're not asking for help where you really need it. You're not being vulnerable in asking for your support and your help. You're not trusting. And she reminded me, she said, you didn't really trust that lady when you first hired her in the first place. Even though you hired her, you said to me, it's challenging because I don't know her and she's not physically here. She said, you almost created that situation where you would be forced to really take a look at it and then ask for help, authentically and in a way that you really needed it. So fast forward to the virtual assistant that I have now. Again, let's talk about how the universe brings everything back to you.
Right.
Is a woman who I worked with 20 years ago in HIV/AIDS services. We worked together. She was my ride or die partner in the work that I was doing at the time. She has relocated to Colombia, the country, and has her own virtual assistant company that serves clients all over the world. So everything that I initially declared that I wanted in this type of a relationship, I now have, because I made the space for it and I authentically trusted that it would happen.
Right.
This is someone who 20 years ago, I literally trusted my life, with this woman. We've kept in touch over the years. I adore her. Her work ethic is exemplary in every way imaginable. And now we have partnered where she is supporting me in my business administratively, and I'm supporting her in growing her administrative, virtual assistant company, which is exactly what I wanted. And I'm so, so grateful.
Now, did that come about because you finally had the conversation with your best friend and then you made an ask in a different way, or did it
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and I made the ask in a different way. I also trusted that the support was going to show up in the way that I needed it, because I think that's where I went wrong before. And that's actually showed up in a couple of other situations, with people that I've hired, as trainers, to train under my company. When initially, like, the antenna goes up, or I'm not really vulnerably like opening up and welcoming this person in, like it didn't turn out well, And so when the trust began with me to accept the help, I had to even be open to getting the support before I could even ask for it.
Right.
And being open to it and having a willingness to acknowledge that I can't do everything and I can't do everything well, so let me reach out and get the support so that people can do or support in a way that works for them and that allows them to utilize their gifts, whether it's just listening to me vent or actually supporting me in my business,
right.
so that I can then do the things that I do well and capitalize on that.
Excellent.
And that's been huge for me. And it hasn't just been about in business. It's also been personally, like asking for help and being okay with looking messy and being messy so that I can, and recognizing that that we all have our messiness, if you will.
Right.
And that we, that it's as much of, it's just as significant to let the mess happen so that we can get the support than it is for us to support others through their mess.
Yes. So good. Thank you, Dawn. That was excellent. And also, do you think this idea too of just saying, getting over this idea that I should have this figured out already, or I should know this, and that kind of thing is something that we all have to move past too?
Yeah. And I think, getting past that, but also like to not engage in the beat up over it.
Right. No beat up.
We can't know everything. We can't know everything. I was listening to another podcast a couple of months ago, and I forget which one it is because I just listened to so many, including
you. Thank you.
But the speaker, absolutely. The speaker was saying that she was in a bookstore, and I certainly can relate because I'm a bookworm. And she was talking about how she's like, a voracious reader. She's always buying the hottest, latest book before she even finished reading the one she started reading. And she said she was in a bookstore one day and she just looked around and realized, and I could live to be 100 years old and I still will probably not read every one of these books in this bookstore.
Right.
But the ones I choose to read that I can just stick with it and rock with it until I get to that last page, that's another book that like now has entered into my spirit and my soul. Another story that has entered, into my consciousness. And that's when I was like, yeah, like we can't do everything. We can't be everything. We can't be, everything to everybody or everything to ourselves. And it's not it behooves us to have that realization, to accept that, so that we can be good at what we're good at and we can learn what we don't know and we can be okay with the stuff that we don't know that we might never learn about, if that makes sense.
No, that does make sense. And it's so freeing too once you finally realize that, like, okay, I don't have to know everything. It's fine.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Now, talk to us about, I know burnout is something that a lot of social workers or people who are in service industries face because you're giving and giving and giving so much and lifting people up in so many important ways. But what would you say are your top 3 tips overall for anyone facing burnout?
Well, I think the first and foremost, particularly in social work, in social work, the burnout is almost an occupational hazard. And I don't say that to just like for folks to just resign themselves to be burnt out, but to not beat themselves up or feel guilty if they get to a point where they are burnt out. I think the second tip would be to adopt a lifestyle that's more prophylactic in nature and that isn't always reactionary, and to be real about it. I think intellectually most of us know about, self-care. I think I'm grateful that self-care is, we're moving through our relationship with the term self-care. For a while it was very gimmicky to me. But I think now, we actually are collectively, especially women entrepreneurs, are really evaluating what that means and what it means for us.
Right.
And from what I know and what research actually supports is that self-care works best when it's a part of a lifestyle. and not just a remedy for when we're already burnt out.
Right.
So everything from get those medical checkups to get enough sleep, take a nap if you feel that you need to, pick up a hobby, say no. Having boundaries is, I believe, one of the most powerful self-care techniques is having boundaries, like saying no. One of my pastors always used to say, saying no to others sometimes is saying yes to yourself.
Yes. And how do we do that when you're in an industry or a profession where, again, giving is such a part of it? Is it just deciding to say, I'm going to say no to something so I can say yes to myself?
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's as simple as that. Or sometimes compromising. Like, I'm a career yes girl.
Mm-hmm. Me too. Yeah.
I'm a career.
You want to make it
happen.
You
would think that I get paid simply to say yes.
Right.
And that's it. But with the last year and with the last 2 years especially, with my commitment to really having this business be what I want it to be, and being more committed to that than being committed to getting burnt out, is when I really have had to be okay with saying no, or with saying, how else can we work this out? Mm-hmm. So if somebody asks, well, can you work with me on this project? And I say, well, I can't do it now, but can we have a conversation a month from now? Can we have a conversation 6 months from now? I might not be able to fully commit. Is there a way that I can support you with less of a commitment?
Right.
But again, being okay with saying, unfortunately, I can't say yes at this time. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to decline. Sometimes no just means if Friday night is the only night that I would have, to myself in one given week, and I get that invitation to go out for happy hour, mm-hmm. Or to go, hang out and give it a twirl that night, right. As much as I may want to, it's like, okay. And I actually have started to say to people, it's the only night I have to myself. Is there another day that we can select? Or can we go to breakfast as opposed to dinner? Because I know by the time dinner comes on that Friday, I'm going to want to just veg out.
Right. Right.
So compromise is okay too, but also know that if a compromise is not necessarily possible in any given situation, it's still okay to say no. Mm-hmm. And it's okay to be okay with if somebody feels some kind of way because of that no.
Right. That's right. You have to be able to sit with that too, because that's usually the reason that we're saying yes, because you don't want to disappoint somebody.
Exactly. And I've learned, and it hasn't always been the easiest, but I've also learned that with some people, their reaction or the way they perceive that no, that's their choice. Right. And I don't have to take ownership of that. Mm-hmm. I think that's also what drives us to continually say yes, and we have to be okay with everything that comes from that, that comes after that no.
That's right. Excellent. Now, what would you say is I can't remember if that's the second or the third thing. That was a big one.
The third thing the third tip that I would mm-hmm. Say about burnout is, this is good that I have to think of a third tip. I would say is to, if at any time, I think burnout is not always just a work-related hazard. Mm-hmm. We can be burnt out from a lot of things in our personal life, or we can just be burnt out in general, from life in general. That includes all of it, right? Mm-hmm. And so instead of being committed to let me fix the burnout, is to, I guess it's really, I think number 2 probably is the best tip, mm-hmm. is to create a life that is either going to prevent or is not going to have the burnout be as severe. Right. Is to really commit to that being your life and your lifestyle. And that's been and still is, where I am, at this point with it.
Excellent. Now, you send out the most incredible, inspiring emails. I'm not even in the, I love them. I'm not even in the profession, and I love them. They're inspiring, but they're also instructive, right? Even for non-social workers. So one of them I read recently was titled, Feel the Feels. Why is it important for all of us to allow ourselves to feel? This sort of goes with the theme of what we've been talking about, this idea of being real with where you are and that kind of thing. But why is it important for us to really feel the feels?
Absolutely. Well, I think one of the, we generally are conditioned to only aspire to feel the good feelings. Mm-hmm. And in a general sense, we should all want that, right? But biologically, emotionally, and mentally, as human beings, we're not wired in that way. We're not wired to always be happy. And our emotions are actually reactions to the connections that we have, either to people, situations, or things. Our emotions are reactions. And it usually comes from our thought processes. So if I love you, which I do, Elayne,
I love you.
and if you're going through a tough time or a rough time, I'm going to feel that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to feel for you. If there's a loss that might be non-physical, like financial loss or whatever, I'm going to literally feel that, whatever the emotions, the sadness, the loss, the grief that comes with that. That's a part of our human process. And so when we numb the pain or we try to repress it, we ignore it, it still doesn't do away with it, right? We're just numb to it. And that's where a lot of addiction and a lot of other, unhealthy behaviors come in, because we're trying to numb. But the truth is, feelings pass. Just as much as, the happiness may pass or may, lull, the same thing happens with the sadness. Like I said, our emotions are reactions, but a lot of times they're also protective in nature. And they allow us to actually move through the experiences that we have in this thing that we call life. And so, like I said, we never really extinguish any of our feelings. So then they come up in other ways that are unhealthy. So by us numbing them and by us ignoring them or trying to be in denial of the not so good feels, and I get that term, thank goodness I have, young folks in my family, where I can learn the lingo of the day, is if we be in our feels, even the ones that don't feel good, it actually is healthier than we think. And it helps us with our emotional intelligence, which we know is key in pretty much every aspect of life. It enhances our health, and it probably extends our expiration date on this earth. Because there's a lot of dis-ease that comes from us suppressing our feelings, the not so good feelings. And so, that's how I got a lot of the business I got when I was in private practice. And there were so many times that I would say to myself, like, if there was some sort of emotional education, when we're growing up, then I wouldn't have to have this job. And so when I say feel the feels, and it's also a reinforcement for me too, because I don't always want to be in my not so good feelings. But when I am, it allows me to actually come out with clarity, with lightness, and to just feel human.
Right. Feel human. And I think that what we mentioned before too, giving yourself permission to do that and then not beating yourself up for being in that space for a short while. That's right. Excellent. Now, what does your support network look like?
My support network, I'm grateful to say, is rather multi-layered. It includes, of course, my partner is a huge support to me. She makes me feel like I can do anything, but she also gives me, constructive, feedback with like, okay, babe, like be careful here, or look out for this, or this is what I'm seeing. Like she's very reflective. And that, means the world to me. It's priceless. My mom still is like, hey, you want to start an ice cream cone business in, the Caribbean? Like, hey, like do that.
Let's do it, right.
Like she's supportive of whatever. I could tell her if I want to sell fool's gold. She's like, okay, like let's talk marketing, which is great. So that's supportive. My family, much of my family, they have like worked in my business for me. They've been supportive. They've gotten the word out. My friends, I have friends that are in the field that are very, very supportive. I have, as you know, many friends who are coaches. When you have a lot of coaches in your life,
that's a benefit.
That's an amazing support network, right? I also have a mentor she's not a social worker, but she has for the last 30 years had a consultancy, with the nonprofit world. So to have someone who does very similar work and who's been doing it longer than me is a gem. You and I both know the benefits of having a mentor.
Yes.
And she's not my only, but she's the primary one as far as like business and business strategy. And I can bounce certain ideas off of her. I like to be creative in my business. Like, my business is my art, I consider it. So she's someone who has enough skin in the game, to say definitely fly with that, or look at this a different way, or I can just call her and, boo-hoo about, something business related. And she's just so loving and so supportive. I'm also in a few, including your mastermind, the Support is Sexy Mastermind. I'm in a few pretty solid, entrepreneur groups online that, everyone everyone is not for everyone, but the ones that I'm engaged in, have been amazing. And I've actually made, some entrepreneur friends or business contacts in that way. So I have to say that my, support network is pretty solid and expansive, and I certainly would not be here, or at least I wouldn't be sane, without it.
Right. Now, what are you looking forward to for your business and for yourself in 2017, since we're rounding out the year here?
Yes, very grateful overall for 2016 business-wise. And so entering into 2017, I will be launching in the first quarter. I'll be launching an online continuing education workshop.
So exciting.
Website. Yeah, it's been a journey.
Right.
And I certainly have learned a lot. I'm nowhere near a tech expert, but there's a heck of a lot that I've learned. So we'll be launching a website where at least initially social workers, but the vision beyond 2017 is for all human services professionals to be able to go onto the site, and it'll be mostly video trainings,
right.
But there'll also be other formats where folks can go online and get their continuing education training. So that's the our hugest goal for 2017 professionally.
Okay, I just have to stop you for a second.
Sure.
That is so genius. I don't know if anyone else is doing that, but that is so no, honestly, because of online courses in general is something that so many more people are getting to in all different industries, right? Creating video courses, whether it's a specialty or, you know, how to learn how to knit, to how to be, a better video editor, to things that are like your business and your profession with social work and continuing education. So I think it's just going to, my prayer is, and I believe it will just open up a whole new world for you and for your business, because you have such great services, and it'll be something that is scalable just because
absolutely
right. I'm sure that's what you're thinking, but I'm just so happy to hear that. And I've been telling so many people in other industry, like a young woman I just spoke to at an event, she's in interior design, and she talked about, I wish I'm going to remember the name of her business, I'll mention it later, but she mentioned this idea of going through slow periods in her business, and she was saying, what do you do, because we all have seasons, right? Different businesses, so anyway, long story short, I said to her, consider maybe there's a way you can offer some service or training or something online. There's just so much opportunity there to develop something. So I'm so proud of you. And if there's anything I can do, I volunteer for tribute. I volunteer for support. If it's editing, anything, whatever it is, because I think it's such a smart move. So, okay.
Oh, I received that. Thank you so much.
So smart. So continue.
No. So, I mean, there are other online training websites for social workers, but what I'd like to say and claim is that the JenTex website is going to be fun and interactive, and, we got some really cool, bright colors going on to keep people engaged and, to keep it uplifting, and also experiment with different online formats. Folks are wanting to do a lot of their stuff online now.
Right.
And there'll always be a market for in-person trainings, don't get me wrong, but you can't ignore the power of the internet. So so that's the big JenTex goal for 2017.
Do you have a website for it yet, or is it going to be on
Not yet.
Okay, you'll let me know and we'll add it later.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. If anybody wants to get on our email list, they can go to jentextraining.com. That's JEN as in Nancy, TEX training.com. The pop-up thingy will come up and you can get on our email list, which our email list, they're like my crew. And so you guys are always the first to know when we're doing something. So the launch information will go out first to our email list, and then we'll be out on social media after that.
Excellent. Okay, I'm sorry I kept interrupting you. What's the other thing for 2017? I was too excited.
No, it's okay. Personally, 2017 is balance for me, I'm going to be completely honest. Also, one of the benefits of having an online training website is that it can free me up to do more live trainings, but to be selective, in that and doing the trainings that I really want to do, which is happening. I'm actually booking up pretty well for 2017, but it'll free me up to do the trainings I want to do and to also expand my trainer team. To bring on other trainers, because I'm not good at everything, but I want people who invest in JenTex and in our services to get the best of whatever they want. So bringing on additional trainers and expanding my training team, but having balance just personally so that I don't have to work as much, and, can be fully present in my off time with the people that I love and the people that I want to catch up with and spend time and giggle and travel with.
Excellent. I love it. Sounds perfect. Now, what would you say entrepreneurship has taught you about yourself as a woman?
As a woman, it's interesting because I was just thinking about this the other day, and that, there's a lot of the way we do business that is based on a patriarchal structure or structures. And so I think one of the inherent challenges for women is to do business in a way that works for us individually and collectively as women. I definitely think that we're heading in that we're definitely addressing that, and I love it. And so what I can say, interestingly enough, my profession is heavily female, is predominantly female or female identified. But most of the men and men, those who identify as men, in my profession are, I guess, proportionately more in administrative roles. And so a lot of the folks that I engage with when, an organization is booking me, for a training or bringing me in to do some consulting, a lot of the folks that, I'm dealing with are men, but I guess, I don't know if it's because they're social workers. They love that there's a woman out there who has this social work business and who's doing, what I do. So I think and that's when I have my, and not because it comes from a man, but I have my fist pump moment. That's like, yeah, we're doing this,
right.
Right. And that we get to be bold, and we get to, to create based on what we want and what we see and what comes through us, and not based on a model, of competition, because I don't believe in competition. I believe in abundance, even in business. Even if someone else is a trainer or has a consultancy that looks just like mine, it's not, they're going to have their energy and I'm going to have mine.
Right.
And so there's a lot of validation that I've gotten, especially from other women, but also that I get to create not just the service or the product, but my business model. And I get to do it in a way that works for me, the woman that I am,
Right.
Yes, there still are best practices. I get that. But, and I think that, online commerce, has also helped with that, to really give us spaces to be creative. And so the support network comes in to really be the foundation and to be that safety net so that we can create and we can be bold and we can try new things and we can test things out and still be able to fall back and lean in and to see our enterprises and our businesses grow.
I love that. Now, in closing, if you think over your life and career and you had the chance to thank only one person whose support was critical to you personally or professionally, who would that be and what would you say?
It would be my mom. And I'm tearing up as I think about it. Mommy, not only thank you for giving birth to me, but literally from day one, to not just telling me that I could do anything, but to showing and to being a model that I could do anything. And even at 42 years old, still giving me that support and that encouragement with the same spark and energy than she did when I was 3 years old and was excited because I'm learning to read, That same texture and the same feel anytime that I get that, that support and that high five from her that I did when I was a kid. And that's why, as 42 years old, I can still give it my all and still dream like I did when I was 10 years old, or when I was 18, or when I was 22.
Oh, Dawn, you're going to make me cry. So beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
Yes. Now tell us how we can support you. Your website, give that to us again. Any social media and anything else. We're going to be looking out for those courses.
Oh,
but anything else you want to share with us?
Yeah, any social worker in your life. And what I also do, as a consultant, I also have done workshops in corporate spaces around, mental health in particular, and I call mental and emotional health. But if anybody has any social workers or human services or social justice heroes in their lives, please, encourage them to give us a look, because we offer various types of support in addition to the workshops. And you can find us at JenTex JenTex training.com on the web. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/JenTex Training. We're also on LinkedIn as JenTex Training. I'm actually getting my groove on LinkedIn, because a lot of my people are on LinkedIn. A lot of social workers are on LinkedIn, so that's cool. And we have a YouTube channel that we just launched, the actual channel, but the content is really going to show up in 2017.
Oh,
and
fun.
That's Happy Social Workers. So you can find us on YouTube at Happy Social Workers.
Oh, I like that. Happy Social Workers. Nice. Very good. Dawn, thank you so much. You know how I feel about you.
Thank you.
So appreciate you. You've been wonderful. Thank you for being so open and truly showing up today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Of course. Now, parting piece of advice from you for our listeners about anything before you go.
Absolutely. Just enjoy it. Even with the hard work, even with the breakdowns and the missteps, and even with the joys and the increased revenues, enjoy it. Be present. Even if it's only 5 minutes that you are sitting and just being present with it, or the little time or the time that you're taking with your family or your friends, be with it and enjoy it. And that's another thing that's been, that's really been huge for me, is to not get so caught up in the rat race that we lose sight of what it's really all about, which is just being present and enjoying our life. So just enjoy.
Just enjoy. Excellent. Dawn Shedrick, I appreciate you. Hold on for just
you.
a second. All right. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that episode with Dawn. And again, you can go to supportissexypodcast.com to get information on the resources that she mentions within this episode. Also, if this is your first time listening or you've been a long time listener, welcome. I'm so excited to have you here. But be sure that you subscribe to the podcast, whether you're listening on iTunes or Stitcher or Google Play. So this way you don't miss an episode. We'll be there 5 days a week and you can listen whenever you like. All right. So thank you again so much for listening. And now you know what to do. Go out there and create something sexy. And I'll talk to you soon. Take care.